mofar, será?
Welcome to Talking in Stations, a podcast about EVE Online. Today, we are going to talk about State of the North, Black Legion versus Snuff. Actually, it's more of a sabotage backstab, but we'll talk about that. And we're going to get into wormhole stuff. Cool. So let's introduce everyone. I am Matterall, and we're going to go with the panel and then the guests. So, Carneros,
Good morning. I'm Carneros.
Artemis,
Howdy, howdy.
Cascora.
Hey, y'all.
And today as guests, we first have Harvey Skywalker.
Comrades, hello.
And from a wormhole space, Exuki.
Good afternoon.
All right, so that's the gang today. Let's get into some of these topics. State of the North. As we know, the war has come to an end. There was the deal signed that was proposed by Aerith to Sword Dragon at, I believe it was at the Winter Summit in Iceland, where the CSM were gathering. There was some negotiations that went on there. That led to a cessation of hostilities, and the North would get a giant payoff. The Imperium would get a giant payoff to leave the North alone for 1 month, at which time they were free to re-engage the North, except for Guardians of the Galaxy or the Dead Coalition, which were off limits for 6 months. Part of the signatories of that deal were 4 regions and people who were in the 4 regions for that. And one of those regions... Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Correct me if you want.
They weren't really signatories. They were just affected territories. They didn't actually sign the deal.
You're right. Absolutely. It's not signatories. And that's key to what we're going to talk about. So they were not signatories. There was only one signatory, and that was Sword Dragon. So the deal was made with Sword Dragon. Sword Dragon decided to include his friends. So those regions were covered by the graces of Sword Dragon. They did not ask for it, the people in those regions. They did not negotiate it, and they certainly didn't sign for it. So wrong word. You're right to correct me, Carneros.
And it might be worth mentioning as well that apparently, hearsay says that Sort was actually offered a deal where he, didn't secure any of his allies. So he was initially apparently offered a deal where, he could pay for GOTG's safety and leave, his current allies out to dry, and he refused that deal apparently, and renegotiated and I guess managed to get a month's reprieve for the other regions and his allies. Obviously I wasn't in the talks, but these are the things you hear on the grapevine, so to speak.
Yeah. None of us were in those talks. Those talks were by Aerith of Goonswarm and Sort, and maybe the team at Goonswarm, which would include Marana, the head of diplomacy, of course, Mittens, who's the CEO or the leader of Imperium, and probably the FC Asher, who would obviously need to weigh in. On the other side of it, people that weren't there were notably Gobbins, who's the leader of Horde, and Horde resides in one of the regions that was covered, Geminate. Since then, Gobbins has expressed his anger. Actually, what happened was, right after it was signed, he sent Sort a message saying, "Get all your Rorquals out of my territory. Get them out of Geminate. I'm kicking you out," basically. I think that was a pretty clear sign, but Sort figured, well, it's just that they don't know what's in the terms of the deal. I got them something good. Let me just talk to them. They'll figure it out. That same night that it was signed, Sort did Ask Me Anything right here on Talking in Stations Discord, where over 100 people piled into one of our channels, and Sort had an hour and a half to talk over and take questions, what was in the deal. And in that time, he was very deferential to Goonswarm. Asher was in the channel listening. And I don't think Gobbins liked that very much. I think he took that as a, wow, Sort's really bowing to the South in such a big way, like he's going over the top.
I might have biases, but I didn't
Yeah.
interpret it as deferential, more just polite and keeping a neutral tone. But I do have my biases.
But essentially bending the knee.
Well, he descriptively
pay
bent more
for-
than the knee. He was like seriously saying like even sexually explicit stuff about, you know, what the goons could do to them and, you know, stuff like that. He might have been tired, maybe not saying the right words or whatever. But I think from Gobbin's point of view, that was like beyond the line. Am I right?
I like to call the deal the wedge, because you know it's structured in a way. This
I
is
love that.
probably it's probably part of the reason, you know, that Gobbins was so angry, right? Because it's structured in a way that it has an imbalance built into it, and you know that's no mistake in my opinion. You know, this is classic, you know, metagaming, you know, at its finest. From Goons, Arith, whoever was negotiating this thing, you know, an imbalance in the deal across the northern alliances can do nothing really other than cause friction between the alliances and a schism, I think is what Arith called it, you know, earlier in a kind of a sarcastic way. He was saying, "Oh, me make a deal that would cause a schism in the north? Never." You know, so it was definitely you can sort of see how Gobbins might have felt about it when, you know, when the terms came out and you sort of picked through the fine print and realize, you know, that it's structured in a very deliberate way and a clever way to cause, you know, as much kind of disruption in the north as possible, I would say.
Well, you
I
can
would
see from the
disagree.
messaging too, though, that why we don't have Aerith as our lead diplomat. We use Marana instead.
I think that yes, it does cause problems. Yes, it was known it would cause problems, but I agree with the assumption we're all making that the original deal was going to be no provisions for the other northern allies, right? If you're Goonswarmer, the Imperium rather, and you're going in to make a deal, you want a separate peace with one singular entity, because that is going to cause the most trouble between all of the groups. Sword Dragon tried to limit the amount of drama that would be caused by renegotiating this deal and getting some provisions made for the other allies. Now, if you're sitting on Sword Dragon's side of the table here, you're thinking, I could have gotten a sweeter deal. My alliance could have paid less, we could have gotten more time without hostilities, things like that, but then it would cause trouble because the rest of our allies would just be left out in the cold. So he is trying to limit the drama caused by this by adding them into the provisions. I don't think it's the case that the Imperium would have preferred that limited terms of protection were included for the other northern territories over 0 terms of protection included. I think if Sword Dragon had agreed to just GOTG's out of this war, everybody else, they're on their own, Imperium would have jumped at it.
All right. Let's actually just finish up the summary and then we can discuss it, just to kind of get people up to speed on what's happened up to now. So with this deal signed, the Goonswarm is today retreating, or yesterday retreating back home to, retreating is the wrong word for it, but they're returning to the south with their heavy-duty super capital fleet. But there was a fireside chat where, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Mittani basically said, well, Horde's not included in the deal if Horde wants to take themselves out of the deal, so fine, we'll attack them, altering the terms of the deal. And that was done because the leader of Horde, Gobbins, had written a ping saying, we never asked to be part of this deal. And that he also reset Sword Dragon's alliance and coalition, and had actually planned some attacks against them.
So was all. I was in that fireside. He didn't say we'll attack them. He did say they don't want to be in the deal anymore, and they're no longer covered as part of it. You're free to do what you want. And there were a couple questions that said, could we troll and Tosis their Sov? Yes, you could do that if you want. Could we do this or that? Could we hit a structure? Yes, you could do that if you want. There was no, we're going to attack them. we still have our plan to take a little break, go home. They're asking people, they're making a sort of World War II analogy of some sort of like, let's go home and have a baby boom of Titans.
Yeah.
Let's go home and see if we can make some more shield Titans to go with our armor Titans. So that's kind of like the overall main plan at the moment. It's going for a little bit.
Right, but the point is that, and we'll litigate this in just a second, but the point is that in the fireside chat in public, Matani said, the deal is altered, Horde is not off limits to Cloakies, to Initiative, whoever wants to attack them, but he didn't necessarily say we're going to attack them. So the terms were changed, and that's where we stand today, that a deal was made, the deal was changed. Was it done properly between the two signatories of the deal? Sword Dragon says, Imperium did not break any deal with me, but he won't say that he was approached to change the deal. And so that's an interesting point. And that's kind of where we're going with this, right? I mean, Harvey, you picked up on the same strain of logic that I did as far as diplomacy goes.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't as diplomatic about it, but I went off. I saw something that was, an inconsistency and a discrepancy, and I started poking at people to try and see what would give and get to the bottom of it, because, like I was saying to you earlier, we were talking about it. Mittens has always told us, and has stuck by the fact that goons, when they make a deal, they stick to it, and they have done, as far as I'm aware. And it's a commendable and it's a strong position to have. If you can maintain, the idea that you will always stick to a deal, then you can always make deals, even with your enemies. And the deal that he signed, or I think it's signed, it's silly, but he agreed with Sort. That was based off of the back of a good reputation of goon swarms and the Imperiums of sticking to their deals. And then it's all happened very rapidly, this sort of train of events. Gobbins resetting GOTG, and then the fireside almost the next day, where Mitten says essentially that it's open season for goons. You can do what you want to his members, to his guys. He just says, you can do whatever. They're no longer covered, and like I was saying, I feel like Sort, is trapped between a rock and a hard place. He's trying to, he's done this deal, obviously, with the best interests of his own alliance, his coalition, and even, his allies in NCMPL. He's definitely making choices to, in his opinion, trying to do the best for his team. Obviously, Gobbins sees it differently, without clearly, because he was not happy. And then now we see that the Imperium, the space violence SIG has moved, like I'd say, just to roughly summarize, about 300 dreadnoughts, which I presume contain their doctrine ships, that they use for subcat fights in those dreadnoughts, and they've moved them into Geminate, into the NPC station of FDZ, and that's a bold move. Nothing that would normally surprise me, but the reason I was surprised and shocked is that that this deal was pretty explicit about what was meant, what were the terms were, what the stipulations were, what would break the deal, what wouldn't break the deal, and a reset between the Northern alliances wasn't in there as a stipulation, and the idea that it would have been in there even as a secret clause or as an open clause, is a bit silly. Why would the Imperium not want us to all start fighting each other and go into a shit show, as Aerith called it? Why would he not want that? So there's definitely at least a grey area. There's a discrepancy, and that's why I was poking at Sort, and I didn't want to put him on the spot too much, because I know that he's in a tough spot at the moment. Because he's got to try and juggle his allies in NCMPL. He does not want to get reset by them as well. He's got to keep a lot of people happy, basically on both sides of this universe-wide conflict. He's trying to keep everybody happy. I do not envy him at all.
I know you all want to weigh in on this, so
I want to give a little bit of context for newer viewers or less experienced Eve players for a moment. And that is when this side of the war, and I know hand gestures don't help very well for podcast listeners, but when on this side of the war, when this northern front opened up, forces from the Imperium started moving north through Fountain, through Cloud Ring, to go and engage forces in sort of the Purblind Fade area, roughly speaking. And the allies in the north are not all mixed together in one soup. There are individual sections, and the nearest section at the time was Circle of Two. So they bore the brunt of the initial attack. Now that Circle of Two has moved out of the area and relinquished those stations in that territory, the next nearest large group is Sword Dragon's Dead Coalition, formerly known as Guardians of the Galaxy. Dead being a name, not a descriptive term. And he started to feel the pressure now that CO2 was gone. So then he puts this deal together, and the next closest group might be Pandemic Horde, depending on how the move goes. So now the leaders of Pandemic Horde feel the pressure for what's next. And that's sort of the context by which people are reacting to these deals. Also, it's worth pointing out that this particular treaty was originally designed to be secret and never really public. And it was going to be a case where if the deal were signed, the Imperium forces would just sort of quietly decide to go another direction and not attack the people involved. And no one would really know why. They just went away. Oh, it's a natural break. Let's take a break. Let's all go back and make baby Rorquals or Titans together. No, it wasn't designed to be kind of out there in the open. So when it did come out, there were people who were affected and surprised. And a lot of people do not like to be surprised diplomatically in Eve. That's some context.
So wasn't there an article posted on Imperium News talking about the deal? Did that come out after it had already...
After it was leaked.
It was already leaked, okay. So they were just trying to control the story at that point to say, look, here's the deal. But people on the GOTG side or the Dead Coalition side leaked it out. So now we have to put an article saying this is what was meant to be. And then you saw a fireside chat after that with what seemed like Amitani and Asher and even Tuzzy just kind of talking people down, saying, hey, this is a good deal. So there's clearly some resistance.
Well, whenever the constituencies hear about a secret deal, they're all going to immediately go to their leadership and go, what is this? What does it mean for us? How's this going to affect my Eve time? And each side is going to try to characterize it in a way that's as positive as possible for their constituency.
Yeah. So and there was also some resistance from Initiative to this peace deal. There's certain people in the Imperium and probably maybe in the North, they didn't want peace. They were having a good time fighting. So they really have to be told, this is better in the long run. One is we can't extend that far from the south. We can't extend that far. That's not going to work. So going into these areas and fighting won't work in the long run. Two is we're getting paid a lot of treasure for something we would have done anyway, which is take a break. These were the ways that they sold it. On the other side, it seems like Sort just rolled over and said, I made this deal. It's the only deal we had. I bought us time. Now you guys have to prove that you want to survive by using this grace period to build up an army to defend yourselves. But his rhetoric was, oh yeah, I rolled over and wow, did goons take advantage of me? Let me, whatever you need, Imperium kind of thing. Like he went overboard in trying to sell it as like, I want to give credit where credit's due. But by doing that, it seems like some of the signals from the other northern powers are like, you rolled over, not us. And they were attacking your area, which was a forward operating area, right? Well, I would say Decline is not forward operating, but basically Pure Blind and Fade. Those areas are not necessarily core northern areas. And Decline probably is getting closer to a core northern area, but that's all considered not secure area, which would be NC territory or PL territory or Horde territory. So
essentially, Pure Blind, like the trenches, and it had held up the Imperium for a period, but with the fall of the DO6 Keepstar, that was pretty much, the trenches were done in Pure Blind, and then you've got the open fields of Declan and possibly Tribute. It was basically the war was about to take, go into another phase, and Asher said on this podcast, I think last week or something, he said that they had decided that they were, that the Imperium wasn't going to go phase 2 and attack Declan or Tribute. They were actually going to go phase 2, pull back, have the baby boom, as Canaris put it. They demonstrated to their guys that they were going to use Titans a lot, and that would give an incentive to actually put that extra push in for Johnny line member to get his Titan, and they were going to go back and do that. And the deal coincided nicely for them with that. Obviously, no one's going to tell anybody that's the intention until you actually do it. And the deal fell nicely, into that plan. So, yeah, like I said, the fields of Tribute and Declan were probably the next thing, perceived as from the defenders' point of view in the north. They were going to be the next thing in the sights, so to speak.
Right. Well, so that brings us up to date on what the conflict is, except that this morning something interesting happened, and I think it was pointed out by, I can't say who, I guess, and that last night or a couple nights ago, Black Legion attacked Venal, reinforcing 5 structures. Then,
whose structures were they?
I think they were just renter structures up in the north, and they would have belonged to renters that pay money to Sword Dragon. And those were all reinforced and by Black Legion. And then there was the reset from Horde saying, we reset Guardians of the Galaxies. It's not a friendly reset. If you see them, kill them. And they also called a red pin, which is the highest level of attention, red pin CTA, call to arms, for the moment those structures were coming out of reinforced. So in other words, BL set up these structures to be killed by Horde. Horde, in between that time, said, we're no longer friends with Guardians of the Galaxy. Therefore, you can kill them and their renters, allowing them to have a perfect moment to strike, which is actually just a few minutes ago that battle was taking place. Unfortunately, the battle, I do not think, and I don't have any hard data, did not go well for Horde. They attacked, and they have not, I don't know what damage was done, if any. But that seemed to be a plan that was in the works there. So it's real. It's not people playing with words. Like Horde genuinely doesn't like Guardians of the Galaxies right now, and they're supposed to be on the same team after all of them got a whomping from the Imperium in the south, who is still, at this point, officially retreating, even though the veil of coverage has been lifted off Horde, so Horde's territory in Geminite can be messed with if people want to mess with it. Now, I think that's a capitulation to people who wanted to continue to fight. Harvey, isn't that what you think?
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
I put you on the spot.
No, I was being messaged about some other spaceship things going on in the background.
That's right.
The question again? Go again? Sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I know you're running fleets and stuff, but it seems to me that enough people didn't like stopping the fighting that this seems to be an easy way for Mittens and the Imperium to say, okay, you guys, you want to keep fighting? Go ahead and take on Horde, even though we agreed they were part of the deal before.
Yeah, I would. If I was in Horde, I would be sitting there wondering, what's really going on, and definitely, like you were saying about the Init thing, Init in their SOTA were not clearly behind the sort of deal. They were a little bit miffed, let's say, having the sort of rug pulled out from under them and told to stop. And perhaps members in the Imperium as well, like you said, like Knaus was saying, the signaling and Mitten said the signaling was not how they would have liked to have put it out. It was leaked from the northern side, and it made it a bit of a mess. The messaging going out to the members and everything. So yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I was talking with Apple Pear earlier, and I'm undecided, but I feel like there's definitely there could well be something there. The conspiracy theorist in me, wants to say that perhaps the deal makers underestimated how keen your average goon was for burning GOTG and continuing the push, because they'd had nothing but success, absolutely nothing but success. 4 or 5 keep stars killed in and around Pure Blind. Titan battles won on an unprecedented scale. I mean, I know BTEC-R is a massive fight, and more Titans were killed in it, but these Titan battles were some of the closest battles, I think, in numbers of Titans, and both sides committing and everything. They had nothing but success. So militarily, you would think you keep pushing an advantage when you have one like that. So I think there was a lot of surprise, like you say, that they were going to stop, and maybe the deal makers underestimated that surprise. And then when Gobbins did his reset, they see a way to actually let loose the dogs of war again, who are chomping at the bit to go back at it in the north, and then the sort of Gobbins reset backstab type thing happens, and it's a perfect Cassius Belli to go at it again.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens here. Anyone else got anything on this? I will say one last thing. It's easy enough for like the line members to say, let's keep fighting, because they only show up once every 5 or 6 fleets, but these fleet commanders have to arrange and work all these shifts. And that brings me to I'm going to make people mad, but I'm going to say it. FCs are kind of the help, aren't they? Like in the house, aren't they the servants of the place? They're the guys bringing you the drinks. Because it's always on its head that the FCs kind of are like,
I would say the logistics
powerful
guys are, and the and the scouts and the Sinos and all the recon folks, and there's a lot of support folks. The FCs put in a huge amount of work, but they also get some attention from it. They get we'll just say their egos fluffed a bit.
Yeah. Well, I just mean, like, if you're a player of this game, there are people setting up your fun for you. They're working hard at doing that. So you kind of show up when you want, you participate when you want, and then you log off and you're done. So I consider FCs like the help. Same with logistics.
Yes.
I'm just teasing them. Okay. There is something else that we're going to talk about. Ben, I keep calling him Blandemic Legion because of what Harvey was talking about earlier in Talking in Stations. Can you tell us what that was, Harvey? Like that whole joke?
All right, so I was just memeing about a little bit because, everybody's a backseat general, myself included, and we sit and we look at the north and we look at the conflict and we go, what's happened? What's going wrong in the north? What's going right in the south? And it's quite clear to a lot of people, that there's a different structure there going on. You might say that the north is very much like the CFC was before, when it lived in the north, before it changed to the Imperium, before there was the consolidation under Goonswarm. There was spread, many alliances spread over that large area of the north. The same mistakes basically that that led to the losses in World War B by the CFC, are happening again, and it's very, it's like the CFC 2 North. It's just over again, the same stuff. And then I was just joking around saying that, to solve it, we were going to take every single corporation in the North, be they in PL, NC Dot, Rate My Ticks, the rental alliances, absolutely everybody, hoard all of them and just blend them together into one big alliance. And then, have a single leader. And I was just joking, assigning roles for Vince, for Sort, and all this stuff, having a bit of a laugh. But behind the jokes was the thing that it was basically commenting on the the way that the Imperium has adapted and changed after their loss in the World War B, and hopefully how the North could adapt to create like a counter culture, a counter Imperium. Lessons learned through losing in the same ways. You would have thought perhaps we could have learned those lessons rather, from watching what happened to the CFC. But anyway, sometimes you just got to learn things the hard way, eh? And I blended everybody's names together and made it some weird blend or something.
You also had a name for the North that I really liked. What was that?
I don't know.
You say them so fast, you might not remember.
I like naming things. What can I say?
Yeah. You're super fast with it, but you call it the CFC Point North or 2 Point North.
Yeah.
That was pretty funny. Which is kind of interesting because the whole thing about the North being the CFC is that they're fragmented. They're unified as the North, but they're super fragmented. You can see they're even fighting each other at the moment. Whereas the lessons from Aegis-Sov was to gather everybody in the same corporation or the same alliance so you can own the same structures. And the Imperium seems to have done that much better. And it's funny because they were getting teased hard for that. They're saying, why dot everybody? Watch out. If you ally with goons, they're just going to swallow you up. But guess what? That was a plan, and that plan is working. All right. Do we want to talk about Black Legion next, or do we want to go to wormholes? Because I feel like we're going to have... Let's talk about wormholes first. I think there's a couple things to stir people up about. Plus, most of the audience is probably from nullsec, so they'll be like, grr. Cascora, what's going on in wormholes?
Well, we tend to get overlooked a lot because of all the nullsec shit going down.
Represent.
It's kind of the typical thing you think about with wormholes is we're a smaller population of the game. But so obviously the big news, the big craziness that always happens seems to be with nullsec. You hear about the Titans, you hear about the supers, and you don't really hear about a lot of the wormhole fights because they're usually on a smaller scale. There's none of these big, super crazy ships getting exploded all the time because we can't have Titans and supers in wormholes. So they don't seem as flashy and as big for publicity as a lot of the nullsec fights. So a lot of times we just kind of sit silently in our little wormhole community and just bounce things off each other is the way that we kind of spread our talk. So coming into a forum like this is not super common because, again, a lot of people aren't nullsec people. So they might not understand how we live or really see why the big fights that we have matter as much to us, because to them, this might be small potatoes, like 100 people fighting in a wormhole. That's why is that relevant? But for us, that's, it's a big fight.
Well, something came up that was super relevant.
Yeah. So one of this kind of is really kind of exemplified in some of the recent changes they announced. They announced that they were going to be removing the any navigation effects from Hicks when they have their bubble up.
So CCP announced, to be clear.
Yes, CCP. This was announced in the recent, was it a dev blog, I think, or was it with their patch notes or something? But it came out because in K-Space, the 500 MN Hicks were really overpowered, which of course we never fly those. So that was something that was kind of oh, okay, well, it doesn't really affect us that much. It affects them. But there's another aspect of the Hick. See, my dog really agrees with this too. This is a big deal for him. But the Hick changes really, really, really affected us because Hicks, the way that they are right now, is a big aspect of how we roll wormholes. So for people who don't know, you can collapse wormholes either by time or by mass. And Hicks can vary their mass extremely based on if the bubble is up or if you have an oversized prop mod or not. And so removing this would have made it very difficult for people to roll holes when they're a small mass. So I know EXO talked to them about this at FanFest, I believe it was, right?
So
Well,
it's
I mean, this is, this item came up because, and it was also talked about in the March dev blog that it's, CCP's wanted to get rid of lurch hectors for a while, and that was fine because in wormhole space, lurch hectors are just a meme. Like they're silly, but they don't really do anything of value in wormhole space besides make you be like, wow, look at that thing disappear. Or occasionally like murder people that warped in at 100 and they blink and there's a broadsword on top of them because it goes 8K a second. But we just said like right now as it is, being able to roll frigate wormholes with Hectors and being able to have a diminished risk in rolling crit wormholes is relatively important to us. So we said, please make sure you don't mess that up. They said, no problem, we'll roll them out together. And then, as the dev blog stated, they decided to change their mind and not roll them out together.
So this definitely sent some ripples through the wormhole community when this was announced, not just because the changes suck for us, but because in a way it kind of exemplified a lot of how wormholers feel when it comes to CCP and dev changes. A lot of us kind of feel like we aren't really considered, and especially it's really seen now that we don't have a dedicated CSM member that's a wormholer. Previously we had Noobman, we had Corbex, we've had people in the past for at least 4 or 5 years. We've always at least had one wormhole person. Some people who might fly in wormholes, but there's always like that one wormhole guy. And this year we didn't have that. So it feels like it's even more epitomized that people just aren't really thinking about how things affect wormholes or how wormhole is affected in the game. And since we're smaller, it seems like, oh, well, it's just collateral damage. It's fine. We know it's going to affect you guys, but you're just a small group. So why does it matter? And for the people who do play in wormholes, it really matters. And the people who do play in wormholes, for the most part, are very committed to this game. We've been playing it a long time. So it really, kind of hit us in a couple different ways, this change.
They called you, well, they didn't call you. They said the effects that you would feel were collateral damage in the official announcement, which actually collateral damage became a term that was picked up and saying, see, this is how you see us as not as innocent bystanders that aren't engaged in the actual conflict. Like we're just a side project.
Right.
Am I overstating that? I think I am.
And but that's kind of how it seemed to us, because they always talk back about how, like, well, wormholers weren't meant to be lived in the first place. Like that keeps getting brought back, that, well, wormholers, when passes, that wasn't supposed to be a solid part of the game.
But they weren't.
They
right?
weren't, right? But then they always talk about Eve as being all about emergent gameplay, that everything is supposed to be adapted and changed based on the players. And so I feel like wormholers are the best example of that. We're a part of space that they didn't intend on, but we've created our own home in this type of space. We've got a large community, not as big as some of the null blocks, but still, we've got a committed group of people in this wormhole community of ours, and we got our own little culture going on. And so when they say stuff like, oh, well, you're just collateral damage, or, oh, it'll be all right, you guys will adapt, like we've had moments of those before, and it feels like we're just not being considered when we are so devoted to this game to begin with. I mean,
Right.
even regardless of wormholers, I know Exuki, like he and I, we both have meetups. We are really involved in all the community, like not just wormholes. So
Right. So yeah, so you guys got upset. It was clear. You guys came out of the forums. I think immediately CCP said that we hear you, and there will be some kind of a fix. And then later on, well, of course, there was a huge outpouring of conversation. Even in Talking in Stations Discord, there was a huge back and forth. A lot of people were saying, suck it up, the null suckers. But basically, CCP recognized that it was a problem, and they said we're going to fix it. Do you think they fixed it? Exuki, what do you think of their change?
It works. It's not completely ideal, but I think, we've got to compromise a little bit. I would have preferred that it was a script so that it doesn't require me to have to refit between having a Hector that can be, somewhat combat ready and needing to have the module that I need to have fit to actually do its rolling purpose. Because right now I have several heavy interdictors that can do both things without needing to do anything. But now I'm just going to have to carry around a mobile depot with the module that I need, and it adds a quick extra. If I'm doing it in the field, it adds a quick extra minute. If I'm doing it at home, I'll just dock up, swap them out. But it's annoying, but it's acceptable. In my opinion, the new change that they've proposed that will allow us to continue doing everything. What I think is, for the most part, silliest, though, is that they act like it took them a little while to come up with this solution. This is the solution they proposed at FanFest. They said, what if we do this? And we said, yes, that looks fine. And then, 5 months later, it's like they forgot that they already had a solution for this. And I don't know. It feels kind of silly.
Do you think the CSM was good on their representation for you guys, or was it lacking?
It was mostly Brisk, wasn't it? Who represented for you on this?
Well, internally, that's what they said. That's what the CSM said. The only person that really kind of raised a.
I mean, I've talked with Brisk a bunch. I have none of the other CSMs have really reached out to me, but I've had several different one-on-one conversations with Brisk. It's really hard to say beside, what the truth is. What I can say is that from the outside, when they come out here, the impression I get is that nobody tried very hard to convince CCP that, making wormhole space was collateral damage wasn't good. Brisk says he stood up and attempted, but to persuade them otherwise. But whether or not he did, I'm not sure it matters. I'm not sure we could really ever prove one way or the other. Just that I would not be very surprised at all if no one else in the room even cared. Is, I guess, my honest opinion of the CSM.
I mean, we've had multiple CSM members coming out and literally stating that they just don't care. So I don't think you're off the mark there.
Yeah, well, and there's some people in the chat saying like, well, how committed are wormholers if you couldn't get enough votes for a CSM? And, that's another thing too, is that the reason, like, it's hard for all of wormhole community to come together to vote for one person when nullsec is just so much more populous. And a lot of times people in the past have won with wormholes because they've had null support too. Like Noobman, he was really big with PL as well. So he was able to get in there as well. So, part of it is politics again. I mean, this CSM has like 5 Goonswarm members or something like that. I mean, it's obvious that there were certain groups that 6, there were obvious that certain groups turned out to vote more so than others. And, we pulled together to try to get what we could, but sometimes the numbers just aren't there for us. And so we try to, some people have kind of reached out like, oh, well, I can talk about wormholers, but unless you really live there or unless you're really committed to thinking about wormholes, it's hard to, like people just don't think about us sometimes when they're thinking about stuff that interests them because, that's more important to them.
What could be done now to help set the stage for better participation and getting a candidate in there for the next CSM?
Well, I think all of Wormhole Space had pretty much chosen their like desired candidate. For us, it was Exuki, who he was the one that we kind of all agreed should represent us in a way. I mean, he's been around in wormholes for forever. He has his own meetup. Everyone knows who he is. So he was kind of our candidate, but he's maybe not as big in nullsec where Noobman was, and he's got a big name for himself there. So I think really, if we want to do it for next year, we need the nullsec people to help support us and understand that we should have a voice too. Best we can do, hopefully.
I think, for the most part, there were 2 kind of issues that we had overall this year. There are probably people out there that have more data or more insight to support or dispute these claims, but more people from other parts of space voted in the CSM this year than wormhole space. It's difficult to say, well, that's because wormholers just didn't come out and vote. I suspect it's a little bit of not as many people voted this year, but I think it's also proportionally. I think a lot of people in nullsec might just actually have more votable accounts now than they did a year ago. I have very little data or facts to claim that. Besides, that's just the impression I got. I mean, because I've got no shortage of people that told me, "Well, I voted for you. Sorry, it wasn't enough after the fact." And I mean, a lot of people, are concerned that we didn't do very good about solidifying ourselves behind one candidate. With very few exceptions, very few people voted for another wormhole candidate that didn't vote with me on their ballot as well. I mean, there were some, but amongst all of the wormhole ballots, it was a very small part. The only part that's probably even worth mentioning is I had no or very little Russian support from the Russian wormhole community. They voted for their own CSM and absolutely nothing else. But it proportionally, it seems that nullsec just got even better at figuring out the best way to, for lack of a better phrase, game the system. They know exactly what they're doing, and as a result, you have a CSM that's relatively disproportionately representing the game. If it was actually proportional, I think a third of it at least would be high-sec people, because everyone forgets that the largest portion of the game is high-sec people. Now, how you distinct that is different. But as of last year, when I know Quant actually shared some of the data, high-sec was 40-something% of all of EVE as far as players go.
As far as the voting in the CSM is concerned, if somebody knows better, then please correct me. But from my understanding, because of the STP voting system that we have, it's not that the wormholers failed to order Azuki at the top of all of their ballots, and so that's why they lost. If any wormholer had him on their ballot anywhere, top of the list, bottom of the list, didn't matter, then as the other people higher in the list got eliminated because they didn't get more votes, their votes would eventually get to him. So it's not that they failed to coordinate such that he wasn't at high enough on their ballot. It's that literally not enough people had his name on their ballot, period, to get him into the CSM. It's not a coordination issue. It's that not enough people voted for him at all.
Well, and this brings up the representation thing. Players elect a Council of Stellar Management, which is CSM. It goes up there, advocates, and basically checks what CCP is up to make sure the majority of the players in EVE, or not the majority, but the players in EVE will like those changes. That's part of what their function is. These are the new changes we're coming out with, says CCP, and CSM says, yeah, those kind of work. Maybe you should think of this or think of that. And another part of it is give us feedback on stuff that's already out there. And I think there's a third function in there that's, I don't know. But basically, they are an intense focus group, and they're kind of representation of the client base that CCP is serving. Is that a fair characterization, Carneros?
Yeah, but what we have to do is take the reality of the current game into account and plan ahead now to make a change if you want to change. Maybe that change is to coordinate and communicate more earlier and push harder. Maybe that change is to convince more wormholers to invest in skill point farms just to have the extra votes to then vote. Maybe you have to do a deal with other people's skill point farms. Maybe you need to do more diplomacy outside of the wormhole sphere of influence. Maybe you have to come up with something new and innovative. Aerith is providing actually some advice in the stream chat, which is kind of unusual for him to see him giving useful advice to wormhole folks. But something's got to be done. If you just stay on your current path, you're not going to be happy with the next CSM's turnout.
Well, right. So that's what CSM's point of function is. But the players that are picked to represent the game generally are the organized ones that produce a list. Say, here, members of our alliance, corporation, or coalition of players, this is a list of people you should vote for. Creates voting blocks. Those voting blocks have basically put in, I would say, 8 out of 10 people, right? Like, there is nobody on CSM except maybe one person, Steve, who was not on those lists. Is that a good assessment of that? At least that's my recollection. So it begs the question: is a democratic voting system the way they have produced? Is that the best way for representatives of the gameplay of EVE Online? Is that the best way to get representation? Because not all gaming companies do it that way, right?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the only really thing that you can do or that should be done here is CCP is the only one that really can do this. Is they can look and say the CSM is giving us what we want or it's not. Like lots of people are like, oh, they should do this, we should do that, or they moan about how it's not working for them. But it is what it is, and there's no point in me whining about how Wormhole couldn't get on there. We just didn't. Then that's because the current system that's set up, makes it difficult, not impossible, but it's definitely an uphill battle. Now, if CCP believes it's important that they have a Wormhole voice there, they could do that. I think a lot of people seem to forget that CCP can pretty much have the CSM be whatever they want it to be. If they wanted to, they could have, people that were, that are representing a certain area of the game. If they wanted to, they could make it bigger. They could disallow so many people from the same groups running. Like there's a lot of things that they could do. I think the fact that they're not suggested for the most part, the CCP is relatively okay with what they end up getting here. So that's just what it's going to be. There's a million things they could do, and from my perspective, as the minority that's currently being excluded, I would love to see change, and there's things they could do to make it better, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the answer or the correct way to go about doing it. But I would hope that CCP does look at the CSM though, and does at least ask if this is still working and end is still what they want. And if the answer is yeah, it's working out fine, then great. Keep doing what you're doing. But I guess maybe we'll see. But I mean, it's not like I'd hope that at least that they're ignorant to the fact that the CSM is not terribly diverse. I want to say this is the least diverse CSM we've ever had, but I only really started paying much attention to it a couple of years ago, so I don't know if it's been this bad in the past as well.
I think part of it is that we have to kind of also recognize that in the gaming community, the CSM and the relationship that CCP devs in general have with the player base is kind of unusual. So I think we sometimes tend to take that for granted. And I think it's great that there is even this avenue. But again, like Exuki said, it's got to be, it's what they want it to be or what they're allowing it to be. So in the meantime, I mean, people who are really active in the community eventually do get some connections to CCP. I know that when certain changes come out, and like this one, people, get on the forums and they want to talk, and some of those relationships that we develop at like eVegas or FanFest or anything like that also comes into play a lot there, just because people who see you in person are more likely to listen to you than just an anonymous name that's complaining somewhere too. So I think in a lot of ways we do try to rely on that to hope that our own relationships that we form will matter in the end more than maybe an elected CSM will.
If you want to have some influence on CCP, one of your other methods is to go to your local EVE events, your EVE Vegas, your Amsterdam, your G Fleet, all these things. Meet the CCP guys that come. Buy them a beer. Tell them your story.
Bribe them.
Yeah, bribe them.
With licorice, right? Don't they love licorice?
Or liquor, seems easier.
Didn't someone mail one of the devs a bag of gummy penises? I think that works real well, right?
I think it was opposite signal then. Yeah. No, I know that people in Iceland really like the taste of licorice, which I
They
think
do
all
like that.
Iceland and Scandinavian countries have candies that are like.
Yeah, I had never encountered chocolate-covered black licorice until I moved to
Oh
Iceland.
God, that sounds horrid.
It's not as bad as it sounds. It's not.
Well, in any case, I know that a lot of the wormholers tend to be really active at these meetups. I mean, Ixuki has his own, like, he's the one that organizes Eve Northeast, which I went last year, and it was really fun. It was like 100 and something people. Fozzie was there, and that's awesome. I did Eve Retreat this last year. It was smaller because it's the first year, but it was a lot of fun too. And I know at FanFest, like, my group always has a big group that goes. We always have a big wormhole party. It's always a lot of fun. FanFest is the same. So, again, like, we might not be the most populous, but we're very active in this community and in this game, and it's fun. And we've got our own little group going, and it makes me happy to play the game for all the different people in our group.
Well, anyway, we were kicking around the idea, I think, on the Open Comms show that maybe there should be okay, first of all, it should be said that CSM isn't the end all. They give information, they give advice. I think what was notable about this one, and the reason it keeps coming up, is that the CSM had said they weren't listening to us when we got there. And SORT had an emotional moment even. It's highlighted as one of the things. And they really said, what are we doing here if we're not going to be listened to? So it was going very bad at the beginning of their summit. So then they went out, they had beers, just like Carnero said. Lo and behold, the next day, they're like, all right, we've listened to what you've said. Here's some balance changes. They put those balance changes out, and wormholes get screwed. So it seemed like this is the first time the CSM had really influenced directly and quickly CCP to make some changes. Those changes were made. And it didn't account for people who are going to be hurt by that. And hurt, maybe you need to evolve. Maybe it's your problem that you're hurt about it. I don't know. But the point is, there was definitely enough uproar to say something's happening there. And again, this is not the only avenue that CCP has from players to listen to how they should change the game, but it is one, and it seems like, by their own account, it was a very significant one this time around. So what I'm thinking is, well, if most of those people are homogenous, which they are, a lot of them are nullsec leaders. If you look at it, there's a lot of nullsec leaders there. Then everybody else's play style is really just kind of collateral damage. It's whatever comes after the main things that serve their purposes are. It doesn't matter if you're from Goon Swarm. I'm not saying Goons own CSM. I'm saying like nullsec owns CSM. And yeah, they have alts in a high sec, and yeah, they've played low sec, and these guys have played all ranges of the game. They played it a long time ago. Who knows like what's going on in high sec these days, or what the current strategies are in low sec? And I should say that Suetonia is a low sec guy, so it's not completely vacant of low sec representation or faction warfare representation. So then that begs the further question of, is this the best way to get representatives of a game? I mean, I think everybody likes science fiction, and I brought up this point before. Some people laugh at role playing. Some people really get into it. Like, where are those candidates? Where are the guys that do theater as a living? Where are the guys that do science fiction writing of comic books as a living or as a primary thing? Like, where's all that influence coming from? If the CSM is really elected by technicians of the game, whether it be on a strategy level or an actual tactical level. So there needs to be a broader definition of what an EVE player is. It's not just somebody that's in leadership in one of these alliances. And that's a semi-rant about that. But, okay, so Wormholes also had a giant fight, though. And we don't know if what actually happened here. Does anybody know even like what happened?
I can talk to what happened. So the first thing I think is important to recognize is this was not a big fight. There was actually barely any fighting. So in wormhole space, we don't have asset safety. So the reason that one side of that BR is so enormous, and the reason so much ISK died, was the attackers chose to destroy every ship that fell out of structures. There was the actual fight. I wasn't there, so just the more I wasn't there, but I've talked to several people that were, and they tell me that the actual fight was only about 4 or 5 minutes long. Um, Outlaws, which is one of the Russian groups, decided to use cruise missile Phoenixes as their home defense fleet, which doesn't actually work. It only works in Paifa. So they quickly discovered that they were completely ineffective at hitting Macarials that are pelting at them, and they succumbed very quickly, all died. And then they tried one more hurrah with a bunch of Sleipnirs, in which I don't think anyone would be surprised if I told you what happens when two fleets of somewhat even sizes of Macarials and Sleipnirs face off. That also ended extremely quickly, and they gave up, turtled up, and ran home to one of their structures and let the rest burn. Most of that battle report is simply the attackers launching ships out of structures that they were killing and then blowing those up for the kill mills.
Oh wow.
Which is so, it's, I think most people I've talked to tell me that they were pretty disappointed. I mean, it's not like any of those groups actually wanted this. I mean, I'm sure some people care, but making your kill board absurdly green from fake blowing up ships that no one's piloting is, I'm sure, exciting and impressive to some people. But for the people that spent days of their time keeping hull control, being vigilant, watching, and everything, it wasn't really worth it. They didn't get that big fight that I think they were hoping for. And I mean, then the defenders even got stuff in. They used Titans to bridge fleets, or well, I'm not sure if it was mainly interceptors. So the hull itself, backtracking a bit here, the hull itself that was being sieged is a Class 2 wormhole with a static 5 and a static nullsec. So it is at any given moment always connected to a nullsec. So what they did is the attackers would be attempting to keep control of that static nullsec by usually, they'd crit it and then leave a ship on the other side. Referred to frequently as it's called backstopping. They backstop the wormhole with a battleship on the other side. The hull is crit, and at the snap of my fingers, I can jump my battleship, roll the wormhole, and any chance of you getting in through that hole disappeared. So what they did is they got a Titan, and they put some sinos on their ships, and they got everybody up on the Titan, and they just kept doing this. They'd make them roll the wormhole. They'd poke their head into the next one, and at some point, one of those nulls was in range of the Titan, and it bridged, I'm told, roughly 100 guys onto the wormhole. They blitzed the wormhole and got into a structure. That all being said, because their home defense strategy was cruise Phoenixes, then it didn't work. So like they had people and they still managed to get pretty much nothing done. It might have actually been a worse home defense plan than armor rattlesnakes.
That
Ha 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 ha.
that battle came out to 500 billion or more in damages. But most of that wasn't actual ships fighting.
Yeah, most of it wasn't actual ships fighting. I mean, I don't know the exact ratio, but I think if you grab the BR, the Phoenixes died, or all the Phoenixes that died with a very similar timestamp died in the fight, followed by a whole bunch of sleps and some HFIs, and then beyond that, all the other completely random stuff that you're seeing, that was just Luke getting blown up. Some people are optimistic that could be the start of further conflict. There are loose coalitions in wormhole space, but one of probably the tightest ones is, for the most part, all of the Russians in wormholes are pretty tight with each other. And this was by no means their only wormhole. I think the overall coalition of Inner Hell, Outlaws, and they have a lot of different alt corps that they keep making. They have over 30 wormholes that I'm aware of. This might have been the one that had the most loot, but it's not even the one that they've been staging out of for most of their operations lately. So it's unclear at this moment exactly what's going to happen next. But I'd be very disappointed if their answer to their home system being burned was, well, that sucks, and they roll over and go back to doing nothing. Especially given how much warmongering there was in what the usually quiet Russian types were quite happily shitting on all the people attacking them, making fun of them, threats, all that good stuff. But we have yet to actually see any of that materialize, which is probably not a unique situation to wormhole space.
Well, we'll keep our eye on wormhole space and see how that's going. By the way, one quick question: what's the nature of wormhole space these days? If you were to just say in general, a while ago it seemed like they were being taken over to be rented out. That was a few years ago. Afterwards, I guess it was the smaller groups were becoming extinct to these massive wormhole groups. What about now? What's going on now in very general terms?
So I think for the most part, the being carved out for rental space was mostly just a meme propagated by people upset that they were getting evicted. You have several large groups that, for the most part, dominate the wormhole space landscape on the high class front. Your fives and sixes. Most of fives and sixes are farms by far. I mean, I think there's 112 C6s. I am only aware of, I think, 3 corps that live in C6 space, meaning that the other 100 and whatever are literally all just people's farming space. And the reason, so in that sense, it's kind of like nullsec, where you have a large expanse. Most of it's just being used for people to make ISK and PVE, followed by hubs of activity. It's different feeling though, since in wormhole space they're all disconnected. So it's like you can spend, hours scanning and jumping around C5s and C6s, and all you'll find is tiny little farming corporations. And that's also because in wormhole space, in the larger corporations that are full of more active dudes, because our anomalies, they don't respawn constantly like they do in nullsec. If I want space to satisfy several people's need to plex their accounts and buy new ships, they might it's not uncommon that I know in my corp, there's a lot of people that have their own system. 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 real people own 1 C5, which means as your group gets bigger, you've got to conquer more space. Low class wormhole space, when I say that, I'm referring to 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's still kind of what it's always been. We're actually seeing a slow but steady uptick in corporations that are, setting up shop and trying to PvP and make money down there, most of whom I think are actually real corps and not just, farmer alts. Because wormhole space itself, contrary to what everyone's always memeing about, it's not dying. It's changed a bit. There's a lot fewer corps left at the top of the totem pole, and there's by far, there's definitely a gap between your large corps living in C5 space and all of your other smaller miscellaneous ones living in 1 through 4. But I give a state of the wormholes every year at FanFest, and for the 3rd year in a row, I've had to increase the threshold that I use to determine what corp I'm considering an active PvP corp, simply because if I keep using the same threshold, my slideshow would last forever. The number of corp, this year, I had to raise it to 15 billion a month. Which doesn't sound like a ton, but I wanted to keep it low just to make sure we have a good landscape picture. The amount of corporations that killed 10 billion a month, which is the threshold I used in 2017, doubled from 2017 to 2018. And as is, my slideshow is pretty long, and some people tell me really boring. So I had to up that threshold just to make sure that we could get stuff done. And it's a little early to say if that trend is continuing, but I can also say, because while I was waiting for all the people talking about deals in North and South to finish talking, I was updating my data with the latest data set. This was also the most active summer that wormhole space has had in several years. The annual, if you were graph out kills and ISK value, you have the most active part. And I'm sure this is true for nullsec too. Winter and fall and early spring are the busiest parts of Eve. Historically, there's fewer people playing Eve, and you see some diminishment of activity in Eve in general when we get into summer, because vacations, kids, going outside, sun, whatever. The amount of decline that we had from that between our more active winter portion and the summer was the smallest that it's been since I started monitoring wormholes in 2018 too. So I would say on the highest general level that the allure of wormhole space continues to generally be unique mechanics, no local. There's an entirely different ball game when cloaky camping means a completely different thing in wormholes than it does in nullsec. But it's small gang, sometimes medium sized fleet PvP, and the opportunity for small corps to come out and eke out a living is there.
Mhm.
I'm sure there are some people out there that are going to cry that you'll just get rolled over by the large groups, but that doesn't generally happen very often unless you're asking to get evicted, which these days is, oh, all your structures are low power, you're literally asking me to go shoot you to see what falls out.
Yeah. All right. So are you going to have a presentation anywhere? Did you say you're not doing eVegas this year, are you?
No, I can't. I won't be able to make you Vegas.
All right.
Usually
Well,
I'm the one that does the eVegas presentation
right,
on
that's right.
wormholes, but I cannot make it this year because grad school. Rip.
Bummer. All right. Well, put something together. We'll put it up. All right. I do want to shift gears in our last few minutes and talk to Hi Want To from Snuff. How's it
Hi.
going? How you doing? You and I were both interviewed for NER. I'm very embarrassed about this because you and I were both interviewed, and you're such a soft-spoken guy that you lasted like 7 to 10 minutes talking about yourself, and then I took up like the other 50 minutes.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
I totally forgot you were there till at the very end. You're like, yeah. What are you still doing here?
That's all right.
So I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Welcome to Talking Stations.
Yeah. But man, you were up to something. What happened? Tell us what happened the other night between you and Black Legion.
So initially we had planned to bait out Shoot First, Shadow Cartel, and Siege Green, who are people who live in Metropolis area, and they're low-sec alliances, and they work together. They'd been dropping Black Legion a lot that lives in that area. It's like a corp in Black Legion called Did He Say Jump. They live in that area, and they fight with Shoot First and stuff, and they were dropping caps a lot, so we wanted to bait them out. So we contacted Predator Elite and set up a trap and stuff, and moved all of our supers and titans and stuff into range, and then made sure we weren't seen and stuff, and got ready. And then on the actual day, it was an alarm clock op because they were doing it in US time zone. So we made all our guys wake up early and stuff, got ready and stuff, and then we saw that Elo had just moved all of the Black Legion supers all the way from Venal into range, and Predator Elite, who was supposed to be baiting for us, hadn't even contacted us yet. He didn't tell us that they were going to move supers either. He eventually does wake up, but that's when the timer comes out, because we were baiting on a Fortizar anchoring timer in Secede, which is where Siege Green lives. He woke up, and then Black Legion goes in with their Moonin fleet, and then they instantly drop supers on the subcat fleet of Siege Green and Shadow Cartel and Shoot First, which pretty much just blows the whole bait up out, because obviously they're not going to cap escalate onto supers and stuff. So we're just kind of sitting there at that point in our caps and our carriers, because we did drop in carriers and kill a few subs. And we're sitting there, and me and Tao are like, well, hey, what the fuck? We just kind of wasted everyone's time a bit here. And we get a little bit annoyed. And then some of our allies and stuff, like Kendar from Space Violence and Nate from Wangs, were like, yeah, why don't you guys, just go and kill him? And then we just asked everyone in the fleet if they wanted to go kill the Black Legion supers, and they were like, yeah, sure. No one was against it. So we pretty much got Erestrian, who was FCing the Shoot First Siege Green Napok fleet, to walk back in, drop a few triage, make the Titans untether, and waited for most of the Titans to untether, especially a guy called Mikhail's Titan, because we don't like him. He hates Snuff and talks a lot about Snuff. Wait for his Titan to untether, and we tackled them and just dropped our load and killed them all.
Killed them all. The bill was like 500 billion and damages most of that on the Black Legion side, because you took out 7 Titans?
It was 6 Titans and 1 Super. The Super, I think, was desynced because he just sat on the Fortizar and we were bumping him around till the Fortizar died. But on some people's screen, it was 2 million kilometers away, and some people's screen, it was still on the Fortizar. So I think that was more desync, which is a big issue when you fight on Citadels, because Citadels do cause a lot of desync.
Right. A huge attack. And it's funny because you came in third partying something, but you ended up attacking the people that invited you. Is that right? Or did I just get it completely wrong?
You cut out for me for like most of them.
I'll go back to a second. I wasn't clear on who invited you into this attack. Was it Black Legion themselves?
It was our trap. We set it up. We were just using the corp from Black Legion as bait.
Oh, I got it. So you ate the bait yourself. Interesting.
Yeah, because they fucked up the bait.
Oh, as a punishment. Now, this is something like you'd think like, oh, poor Black Legion, but Black Legion has done this to other people too, haven't they? And they've been called by some other group saying, hey, Black Legion, we got something you might be interested in. They arrive. There's nothing to do. Something went wrong. So they end up killing the people that invited them in.
Yeah. Historically, the old Black Legion, not the new one, but the old one more so, would like a lot. They'd do it a lot. They'd like turn up and then just either kill, the people that they were bat phoned against, and then kill the bat phone, or just kill the bat phone for not, getting them kills. They even did it to Shadow Cartel, and Shadow Cartel was pretty happy we did it, even though Shadow Cartel hates us. Like WoW Bagger was pretty happy with it.
Oh, so Shadow Cartel is patting you on the back for taking out Black Legion?
Well, some of them were like, haha, told you so, because, we AWOC Shadow Cartel, but WoW Bagger, who's the leader of Shadow Cartel, was like, yeah, they deserved it, so.
Well, here's the thing. It looks like it's a backstab, right? And this is the second time that you guys have gotten you've done a high profile backstab. The other one was with Shadow Cartel after the casino war, or when it was winding down.
I mean,
are you worried?
The thing about,
yeah.
Well, like the thing about the first backstab was, yes, it was a bad knee-jerk reaction, but the time we had after that thing was pretty great content-wise for us, because a lot of people hated us, and Escalating Entropy split off from Snuff and did their own thing and started openly fighting us. So that created a lot of fights and a lot of ganks for us. So we had a pretty good time after that. And the thing about the game right now is it's become super Blue Donut, and everyone's super buddy. Hopefully, we'll get a few more fights out of this and more people will hate us. It's good for us. We like being the bad people. We like to fight people. That's what we live for.
You're okay in that role.
Yeah, because we're not a nullsec alliance. We can piss as many people as we want off, because you can't really evict someone from low sec. You can kill our stuff, but that's it.
Right. Well, thanks for getting us up to speed. Do you know what's going to happen next?
No, not really. I mean, hopefully Black Legion does try something, but I think they're focused with Siberian Squad up north right now. They did just have a fight with them, which they lost, where Siberian Squad dropped supers on them. So they are pushing stuff up in Branch right now, I believe.
They were a little short on supers, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thanks for getting us up to speed. Is there anything else any of you guys want to talk about here before we sign off? I just have an announcement after this if there's nothing else.
I'd like to give a big shout out to Jonas. He's a big guy enough, and he's been supporting our main FC Tau ID through a lot. So yeah, thanks, Jonas.
Oh, one more thing for you, I want to. Your relationship with Horde, it's not a very good relationship, is it?
No, it is not.
With Matani basically saying the Imperium is no longer bound to anything, does that open the gateway for you to attack Horde?
I mean, we've been doing that like a lot recently anyways. We do like to mess around with Horde. The thing is that recently we lived out of Fortizar in Ojanen, which is directly next to Horde. It's like the low sec entrance to Geminate. And Horde, we set it to AU time zone because that's our strongest time zone relative to everybody else, because AU time zone is normally weaker for people, so we can do better in that time zone because we get okay numbers. But Horde, like Bat Phone, like 700 people for it on a weekday, which is a lot for us to deal with, so we just kind of let it die. So we did like simmer down with the Horde stuff. We have been helping goons with some raw core dunks and stuff, but that's about it. But yeah, I think a lot of people are like looking at Horde now as opportunities for content. So if people do go down there, I think, yeah, we will start helping people like goons and stuff down there. I think Space Violence has just deployed down there. So
All right. So you'll
Yeah.
be involved in that theater.
it should be fun.
Well, interesting in a weird way that the Horde, the many versus the mighty, is flipped on its head. It used to be Bob versus goons in that respect, the many being goons, the mighty being Bob. And here it's the reverse, where the goon allied Snuff is the mighty and the masses are Horde, NC allied. It's kind of interesting how history goes in EVE.
Yeah, I mean, Horde is pretty goddamn strong these days. They form good amount of caps as well as subs, but I guess that's raw cores for you.
Could they be the saviors of the North?
I think they are potentially the strongest alliance apart from NC in the North, purely because they have the numbers and the caps, whereas the other alliances don't really have them anymore because they're quite demoralized. Even NC is quite demoralized, but they're still very super cap heavy. So
Yeah. It's going to get interesting. All right. Thanks again, Haiwan. It's really good to have you on to talk about this stuff firsthand. Just want to
Thanks
say
for the
that,
invite.
Yeah. EVE Vegas, by the way, you're from England or somewhere, right? So you're probably not going to be at EVE Vegas?
Nah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm from England.
Okay, too bad. That sucks for us. But EVE Vegas is coming around. It's only in less than 3 weeks now. It's coming
Man, that's
fast,
crazy to
mid-October.
think. What happened to September?
It just flew by. So what you can expect at EVE Vegas are a few things from Talking In Station. One is I will be giving a presentation. It will be the Continuum of War, the continuum of the Continuum of War, which is basically part 2. It'll focus on the last 2 years of conflict. So basically the Casino War all the way up to now. And so we'll see if we can cover that quickly. We'll also be covering, we'll also be having a media roundup, or not a media roundup, but basically a get-together, a meetup, right? So we want to do that. I'll announce it right now for the first time and every time until EVE Vegas, 1 o'clock on Friday. That's right before the opening ceremonies. It's not right before, it's 3 hours before opening ceremonies. And we're going to meet at the bar there, 2525. Everybody who's there will be, will know where that 2525 bar is, because it's right at the steps to go up to the presentations. So if you want to meet Dirk McGurk, myself, Carneros, and other people that are from the media, we will be hanging around there with other people that all create content for you guys to read, to listen to watch. So that's Friday, 1 o'clock before opening ceremonies. And then on Saturday, Talking Stations will have a special lunch with only the Patreons. And we'll have that, again, Saturday lunchtime at Margaritaville. Okay, that's it for us this week. Anyone have some last comments?
It's called World War B.
That's right. You wanted to correct me on that. Anyone else have any comments? Look for 2 things in the future, by the way. What's the name of that war when I give my presentation? Because it's not decided yet. And 2, look at what Andrew Groen says about the same thing, because these are the speech that I make and his book, but mostly his book will be the ones that kind of codify that. And it's a very tricky thing to name. But it'll be really
So
fun.
you're saying that in exchange for protection of your keep stars, you're calling it the Casino War now?
No, I've always called it the Casino War, named by Noisy Gamer, who is part of Talking In Stations. The Imperium may have adopted that title, but it was never their title that they created. That was created by Noisy Gamer. And I've always thought that was an apropos title. I thought World War B was political. I thought the War of Solvless Aggression was political. I thought my title, which I may go back to, the Mercenary Wars, because I don't think it was one war, I think it was multiples, is also in the running. So we shall see. All right. But that wraps up another episode of Talking in Stations, and we will see you next week on Talking in Stations.